Welcome to this week's edition of Outdoors Online, a weekly webcast produced by the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. I'm your host, Tom Jensen. We begin our series of very popular fishing previews this week. My first guest is Paul Bailey. Paul is the district fisheries supervisor for the South Central District. Paul, the lower portion of the Missouri River is part of your district. You're already starting to get some fishing activity on beautiful days like this.
Right, yeah, that's one of the perks of being in the South Central part of the state. I guess we get some of the earliest open water fishing anywhere in North Dakota with the Missouri River system right here.
First question I want to ask you today, Paul, deals with forage. We've had some issues, of course, on the river since the flood here 5-6 years ago. Where do we stand on that right now?
Right, the flood of 2011 really had an enormously negative impact on forage conditions in the Missouri River and Lake Oahe. In the Garrison reach of the Missouri River between Garrison Dam and Lake Oahe, we're dealing with some pretty immense habitat changes that limited what we're seeing for backwater habitat and some side channels out there right now, which are important areas for our forage fish production. So we've yet to really turn the corner in the what we call the Garrison reach of the Missouri River. We're still dealing with some pretty limited forage conditions out there. The upper portion of Lake Oahe, as it stretches into North Dakota, we have seen some improvement, especially in 2014. We saw a nice rebound in what we call our warm water forage out there. We saw a good reproduction of perch, white bass, white crappie, species like that definitely kind of fit the bill for our predatory fish forage out there. 2016, we were hoping for a little bit better. We didn't see that necessarily our traditional warm water forage in great abundance last year, but the one real positive we saw following that winter of 15-16, one of the most mild winters on record in North Dakota, we did see a nice rebound in our gizzard shad abundance. So that helped fill a little bit of that forage void, but we'll see what the future brings here. That was obviously, we just went through a more severe winter, which we anticipate, based on past experience, is going to knock our gizzard shad back quite a bit again. So
seems like everybody wants to know about the rainbow smelt. Of course, they were the primary forage for a long time. Now they're not particularly, but are they coming back at all?
A bit, and that's one thing. The rainbow smelt really aren't a big player in the North Dakota portion of Lake Oahe. We just don't have that cold water habitat that rainbow smelt need to survive year-round in the North Dakota portion of Oahe. So, as I said, the warm water forage is usually what we're relying on. Emerald shiners, spot-tail shiners, and then newly hatched perch, white bass, crappie, freshwater drum, those kind of things. But smelt numbers are kind of slowly but surely rebounding in the South Dakota portion of Lake Oahe, where they have that cold water habitat. And then the other, as smelt numbers were down, our lake carrier, Cisco, kind of filled that void in the South Dakota portion of Lake Oahe. So they're dealing with a little bit higher Cisco numbers in South Dakota than is typical, and I know anglers even encountered a few of those fish ice fishing this winter on the North Dakota portion of Lake Oahe. Herring were actually somewhat common up there.
Okay, how are your fish populations holding up?
Our walleye are looking pretty good. We've got a really nice, diverse length structure of walleye out there right now. I guess the real kicker that we've been waiting on for years and years now is that really strong 2009 year class of walleye. And those are fish that were really impacted by the 2011 flood. They weren't growing very well from, say, 2011 to 2014, even into 2015. Now those fish have finally hit that 16-17 inch range, so anglers should encounter fair numbers of really nice sized fish for the frying pan this year, those 16-17 inchers. We had really good reproduction in 14, 15, and 16, so we're going to see pretty abundant small walleye out there as well. And then it's the Missouri River, Lake Oahe. There's always that trophy potential there too, which I know a lot of anglers get a kick out of. That you can encounter some monsters out here too.
Sure. Paul, you don't have a lot of big lakes in your district per se, but you do have some smaller lakes that are really excellent fisheries.
Yeah, I think a lot of these lakes, that really sprung up in the late 90s through the early 2000s. I think anglers are almost, I wouldn't say taking them for granted now, but they seem like they've been a fixture on the landscape long enough with, like Rice Lake, Dry, Green, Josephine, Alkaline, places like that have really produced well for anglers in recent years, and they're looking like they'll be great for years to come.
You have the luxury of having a lot of fish species in your district. I'd like to cover them one at a time, and let's start with walleyes.
Sure, that's definitely the bright spot. It is fair to say that these really are the good old days of walleye fishing in South Central North Dakota. We've really never had it better. We've got a tremendous number of really fantastic walleye fisheries out on the landscape right now. From, so like it's some of that I just mentioned, rice, alkaline, green, dry, Josephine, places that a lot of anglers have been fishing for a few years around here are probably familiar with. And with the abundant water Mother Nature's provided in recent years, we've been able to produce even more of these prairie lake walleye fisheries that anglers should certainly pay attention to. Some of them are sure to be hot this summer.
I would guess the northern pike populations are probably pretty good in nearly every lake that you manage.
Yeah, we've those high water years, those three springs of 2009, 10, and 11, where we had rising water levels in a lot of our lakes, really benefited a lot of our pike populations. I mean, a few of these lakes, we haven't seen good reproduction in for a few years, so in a lot of our lakes, pike populations might be a little bit on the decline, but there's still really good pike opportunity out there for anyone looking for it.
You have some of the best perch lakes in the state that you manage in your district, Paul. Although winter access was a little bit limited last winter, there still was some pretty good success.
Right, and that was the big disappointment this year, knowing what we had on the landscape for good perch fisheries, and that much like our pike, the perch populations, I'd say we might be either at our peak or probably on the downhill slide for our. Historically our perch are going to be a boom or bust fish species in North Dakota. When environmental conditions are right, following really wet springs, you get rising water levels. That's good for perch reproduction and then good for invertebrate forage production for those perch too. That's when we see these booms in our perch populations. And we really haven't had those conditions since 2011. But the fish that were produced in 9, 10, and 11, there's some really nice sized perch out there in a lot of our lakes. So that was one disappointment with the winter we just came through, is access was very difficult. But as we progressed into February, March here, access improved a little bit, and the anglers were pretty happy to get on top of some of these perch.
We would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit at least about the crappies that were being kicked out of Beaver Bay there for a couple of years. It seems like it took a long time for that fishery to kind of take off, and when it did, it was just gangbusters. Yeah,
it was a little slower kind of developing this year for sure. The winter of say 14-15 and 15-16, anglers were able to tap into these crappie really throughout the entire winter in the upper portion of Lake Oahe. This year it was a little slower developing, and that's kind of to be expected. Crappie numbers are definitely on the decline in Lake Oahe, but the sizes of them out there are pretty spectacular this year. But again, these fish are the result of that rising water level we had that kind of ended the drought in the spring of 2009. We saw tremendous crappie natural reproduction in Lake Oahe, but just even more importantly, we usually do see pretty good crappie reproduction every year in Lake Oahe. The kicker in 2009 was we had such good invertebrate forage production that these crappie were able to get to a large enough size that they were able to survive their first winter. And that's where we got this really strong 2009 year class of crappie that anglers have really enjoyed over the last few years.
We talked a little bit about perch, Paul, and it's interesting how you develop some of these, I guess you'd call them opportunistic sloughs. Down in your district. They're not very large, they're not very deep, but they're full of very, very nice perch. And it's interesting how you and your crews developed those sloughs.
Yeah, we're basically just trying to take advantage of all the water Mother Nature put on the landscape for us. And we know there's certainly demand for perch fishing out there, especially through our winter fishing anglers absolutely love perch. So we did everything we could to try and establish some of these new perch populations across the state by going to a lake that had maybe an overabundance of perch, trap some of those perch out of there in the spring while they still had their eggs in them, and even just transporting a small number of those perch. You can get a few nice sized females in there. Each one of those might have 25,000 or more eggs in it, so it doesn't take a great number of perch to establish a new population. So we did that really successfully in quite a few lakes across the south central part of the state.
Of course, I would suppose you have to determine if there's a good forage in each one of these beforehand.
Right, and that's, you almost can't miss with perch in a lake that doesn't contain other fish species in the spring like that, where you have these new lakes popping up. The invertebrate forage and all that newly flooded vegetation usually just takes off. So
I'm going to put you on the spot, Paul, like we do every year during these fishing previews, and I think people really enjoy hearing where fisheries biologists actually go. I want you to suppose that you take a day off of work, a day like today, anywhere in your district, any lake and any species, where would you go and what would you do?
Well, usually I'd say I'm going to try and target pike this time of year, but we're not quite having the runoff we were anticipating this year, and that usually concentrates pike in a lot of the inlets to these lakes, and I've had a blast doing that in the past. But boy, right now, a day like this, standing by the Missouri River, I guess I can't wait to get out here too with just keep our fingers crossed. It looks like the water will start clearing up. The tributary flows, and the knife and the heart are starting to decline. So water clarity should improve, and hopefully the weather stays like this. So,
Paul, thanks.
Thank you.
We move upriver now. Dave Frieda is the fishery supervisor in Riverdale. Dave pretty much manages the Missouri River system from the Montana border down to Stanton, Lake Skonka. Dave, your district probably affected more by snowpack than any other district in North Dakota, and particularly mountain snowpack. How is it this year, and how is it going to affect Lake Skonka?
Mountain snowpack generally is very good. It's below Fort Peck, which is basically the Yellowstone drainage. I think we're around 130% of normal for snowpack. Above Fort Peck is about average, I think. But overall, we're going to have a good runoff event. We've had a surprising rise here the last 2 weeks in March. We've gained a couple feet of water, which is somewhat atypical for this early to gain that much water. Projections are we're going to be pretty high for water most of the summer. We're probably going to gain another 6-7 feet for sure. So the reservoir will be very high this summer. So.
We just talked to Paul Bailey. Paul has fishing activity already down in the southern part of the Missouri River on Lake Oahe and things. You have the tail race here, which has really been a gem in years past. How has it been this year?
It's actually been really good this winter. Better than the last couple. The last couple have been a little slower than historically what it was, but it's been surprisingly good almost. Quite a bit of activity once the weather broke after the really tough December, early January period, and there's been a lot of activity, and fishing's been pretty good, and actually some fairly nice fish have been showing up on top of numbers, so it's been good.
Let's move up on the other side of the dam now, Dave. How are things looking for Lake Skonka for this summer?
It should be a good summer. Like I said, with high water, access is going to be phenomenal. We'll have good access all throughout the reservoir. Like always though, even when you have a really good fishery, which we do have, virtually all components of the fishery are really strong right now. High water can make angling sometimes tough. When you get a substantial rise, it can make angling a little more challenging even when the fish are there. But
Lake Skonka is driven by a good forage base, which generally is the smelt population. May is the typical time for, I guess, smelt to spawn, and you need good stable water levels, don't you?
Stable or rising. Actually, April's more the spawning period on smelt. But yeah, we need ideally a rising pool, stable at the bare minimum with no wind because they spawn really shallow. We'll see. Like I said, the forecast is for pretty good runoff. Our plain snowpack, though, will probably be gone by then. So whether or not the mountain snowpack kicks in at that point or not, but we had a good spawning period last year for smelt too. So our smelt population's in very good condition.
You have a very wide variety of species in your district, Dave. I'd like to go through them one by one. Let's start with walleye.
Our walleye population in Lake Skonka is extremely strong right now. Last summer, our survey, which we've been doing since 1968, the same standard survey, we had the highest walleye catch rate we've ever documented. Extremely high abundance of walleyes throughout the reservoir. Lots of fish will be available this year in the 15 to 20 inch range. There'll be a lot of fish for anglers. Good numbers of fish over 20 inches. We've had real strong recruitment since about 2010, and a lot of year classes, and things are really good.
About northern pike?
Northern pike are strong. Numbers have come down some. We had a couple big year classes in the lake refilled. Numbers are down some. They're still good, but the trophy component has really started to kick in. There's a lot of pike, 15, 20 pound range. There's a lot of pike, and into the low 20s, and it's starting to kick in now, we've heard. We are having a project we'll be kicking in because of that trophy component that we've developed on the Skonka and Oahe. We'll be doing a pike tagging project on just trophy pike starting here in just a few weeks, and we'll be tagging trophy pike with jaw tags, metal jaw tags. So pike over 40 inches essentially is what we'll be tagging. So we ask anglers if they catch a pike with a tag on it, just treat it like they normally would if they want to keep it, keep it. If they're going to release it, release it. But let us know the information.
Sure.
So call it in or email it or just report that fish.
There's one species on Lake Skonka, Dave, that really doesn't get a lot of fishing pressure. They're overlooked, you might say, and that's smallmouth bass.
Yeah, our smallmouth population is good. Again, like everything, water levels have been good for smallmouth. We got a lot of good rock cobble substrate in areas. Generally, the lower portion of the reservoir, the lower half, is better smallmouth. From Van Hook Arm and down is better. In the east end is the better smallmouth fishery. But there's, yeah, good whopper-sized smallmouth. So
It seemed like it was a pretty good year. Right out here is where most of the people were last year for salmon.
Yeah, salmon was a very good year last year. We anticipated it would be a good year because in the fall of 2015 there was a lot of young male salmon that returned. It wasn't the best fishing year in 2015, but it did turn around in 16. It was exceptional. A lot of quality size fish and good numbers. All indications are we should have another good year coming up. Forage conditions are good. There was again a lot of young male salmon in the run last fall, so that should translate into good fishing. Like everything, overall, all of our fish populations are in good shape. Just how the bite turns out will be the big question.
No major alterations in water levels or anything like that anticipated this summer?
No, like I said, we'll be at pretty high levels, probably in upper 1840s in all likelihood. And the releases will probably be above normal in the Garrison Reach. So that'll, affect boating a little bit down there. It'll actually improve boating in a lot of conditions.
Sure.
But, so that's about it.
All right, I'll put you on the spot like I do everybody else, all the fisheries biologists, Dave. If you could take the day off and go fishing anywhere in your district for any species, and I know it's a little early out, there's still ice on the lake, but where would you go and what would you do?
I'd pike fish like usual. That's the time of year.
Shore fish.
Shore fish, this year shore fish. There is enough open water right now in places. It's just starting to be able to get that shore ice or that shoreline access between the ice shelf. So for pike, and that's what time of year it is.
All right, thanks, Dave. If you need directions to one of the lakes the guys mentioned, or in fact any fishing lake in North Dakota, the new March-April edition of North Dakota Outdoors magazine is an invaluable tool. The special fishing issue has lake maps, driving directions, boat access information, and even what species of fish are contained in each lake, also a fishing outlook from game and fish biologists. If you have a subscription to the magazine, it should be in your mailbox very soon, or the issue is viewable online at the Game and Fish website at gf.nd.gov. For Dave and Paul and the rest of the staff here at North Dakota Game and Fish, thanks for joining us for Outdoors Online. We'll see you again next week.